patrol comes back through the wire at a fire base in 1968, and the new lieutenant, 3 days in country, catches the smell before he sees them. Not sweat. Something else, sour and sharp and organic, like a wet animal that has been living in a compost heap. 11 men file past him, and every one of them is wearing the same uniform he watched them leave in 26 days earlier. The fabric has gone black at the collar and stiff everywhere else. Nobody says anything about it, because in a rifle company in Vietnam, this is simply what a man smells like. And by the end of his own first month, the lieutenant will smell exactly the same. And he will have learned the strangest part of it, which is that on the line being clean could get you killed. Today we're opening the file on the filthiest working conditions the modern American soldier has ever endured. 20, 30, 40 days in the field without a shower, uniforms worn until they rotted off the body, the helmet used as a wash basin, the bomb crater used as a bathtub, the rainstorm treated as a shower with an audience. We'll get into the tactical reason a grunt in the bush refused scented soap, deodorant, and even toothpaste, the medical price the Army paid for men living in permanently wet clothing, the mythology and the reality of the shower point in the rear, and what a hot shower actually did to a man who hadn't had one since the previous month. None of this was neglect. Every piece of it was a decision. If these files are worth your time, do us a favor. Hit like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. It helps the channel more than you know. To understand why a soldier stopped washing, you have to understand where he lived, and it was not the place most people picture. The Vietnam War produced two entirely different experiences of the same country. Somewhere between 80 and 90% of American personnel served in support roles. The great logistical machine at Long Binh, Cam Ranh Bay, Da Nang, Saigon. And for those men, life could include barracks, hot chow, clubs, laundry service, and showers. The precise ratio gets argued over, but the shape of it doesn't. For every man out in the bush, there were many more behind him in a base that functioned, more or less, like a very hot American town. Then there was the other Vietnam, the infantrymen's Vietnam. A rifle company in the field lived outdoors, permanently, for as long as the operation lasted. Everything he owned rode on his back or hung off his web gear. His bed was the ground. His roof was a poncho if he was lucky, and the sky if he wasn't. There was no building, no bunk, no plumbing, no electricity, no infrastructure of any kind. He was resupplied every few days by helicopter with ammunition, water, and rations. Not with bathrooms, and that's the plain mechanical answer to the question the title asks. He went weeks without a shower because there was no shower. There was no water for it either. Water came in on the resupply bird in 5-gallon cans and rubber bladders, and every drop of it was allocated for one purpose: drinking. A man burning 5,000 calories a day in tropical heat needs an enormous amount of water simply to stay conscious. Nobody was going to fly a helicopter into a hot landing zone so an infantryman could rinse off. In the field, cleanliness wasn't a low priority. It wasn't a priority at all. But that's only the logistics. The reason a grunt in the bush actively refused to clean himself, even when he could have, that's the part that turns this from a hardship story into a tactical one. Out on the line, a man's smell was a weapon pointed at his own patrol. The jungle is a closed, humid, still environment, and scent hangs in it. It doesn't disperse the way it does in open air. And the Vietnamese soldiers moving through that jungle knew what Americans smelled like. Veterans of both sides have described the same thing from opposite directions. The enemy could smell an American position, and Americans learned to smell the enemy. Cooking fires, fish sauce, tobacco, unfamiliar soap. Scent was intelligence, which meant everything in an American soldier's shaving kit was, in the field, a liability. So the unwritten rules of the bush came down hard on personal hygiene products, and every one of them had a reason. No scented soap. The sweet floral smell of American soap carries, and it belongs to nobody in that jungle but you. No aftershave, no deodorant, for the same reason. No toothpaste, because mint is one of the loudest smells a human being can wear. Men in long-range reconnaissance units were the strictest about it. Small teams operating deep in enemy territory, where being detected wasn't a firefight, it was a disaster. Accounts from those units describe men brushing their teeth with plain water or a finger and giving up soap entirely for days before a mission so their own scent would fade toward something the jungle wouldn't notice. Think about the inversion in that. A 19-year-old is told, in effect, the cleaner you are, the easier you are to find. Filth is camouflage. And the men adapted because the alternative was advertising your platoon's position with a bar of ivory soap. And the American military took the scent problem seriously enough to weaponize the concept in the other direction. Beginning in the late 1960s, the Army fielded a device officially called the personnel detector, an airborne sniffer mounted in helicopters designed to sample the air over the jungle and register the ammonia given off by human sweat and waste. The troops called it the people sniffer. The theory was that concentrations of human scent over supposedly empty jungle meant troops hiding under the canopy, and the readings could be used to direct artillery or airstrikes. In practice, it was famously unreliable. It could be fooled by animals, by villages, by weather, and the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong reportedly learned to counter it by hanging buckets of mud and buffalo urine in the trees away from their actual positions, generating false readings that pulled fire onto empty ground. The device is remembered today mostly as a technological curiosity that didn't work very well. But it tells you something important about this file. The smell of a human body was considered, by both sides, to be actionable military intelligence. The grunt who left his soap behind wasn't being superstitious. He was operating on the same principle the Army was spending millions of dollars trying to exploit from the air. That decision solved a tactical problem and created a medical one, and the medical one was enormous. A human being living in permanently damp clothing in a tropical climate is a laboratory experiment in skin failure. The uniform never dried. Between sweat, rain, monsoon, wading canals, and crossing paddies, a grunt's jungle fatigues could stay wet for days at a stretch. Wet fabric against skin, plus heat, plus friction from the rucksack and the web gear, plus dirt ground into the weave, produces exactly what you'd expect. The skin breaks down. What the men called jungle rot covered a range of real conditions: bacterial and fungal skin infections, and the immersion injuries of feet that never dried. Sores opened at the belt line, the armpits, the crotch, the ankles. Small cuts and insect bites that would have scabbed over in a week at home instead went septic and spread. The Army knew, and its own medical statistics from the war are blunt about it. Skin disease was one of the leading causes of lost duty days among infantry in Vietnam, on a scale that mattered operationally. Men were pulled off the line, not by the enemy, but by their own skin, which is exactly why, as we've covered in previous files, the Grunts developed the countermeasures they did, cutting the sleeves, abandoning underwear entirely because it trapped moisture where you least wanted it, and rotating socks obsessively when nothing else could be kept dry. Look at the pattern. Underwear, socks, soap, three of the most ordinary items in civilian life, and in the bush, each one got re-evaluated from scratch on the same question. Does this help me survive, or does it hurt me? And two of them lost. So, how did a man in the field get anything approaching clean? He improvised, and the improvisation was ingenious in the way that only necessity produces. The steel helmet was the field wash basin. Take out the liner, and you have a metal bowl that holds a couple of gallons. And it was, at various times, a sink, a shaving basin, a laundry tub, a cooking pot, and a seat. If a man could spare an inch or two of water, he could get his face, hands, armpits, and crotch washed, the whore's bath, in the blunt terminology of the barracks, hitting only the parts that mattered. And that little ritual was, for weeks at a time, the entire hygiene program of an American rifleman. There was one piece of hygiene the Army did not treat as optional, and the exception proves how the whole system worked. Shaving was still enforced in many units, even in the field, not because anyone cared how a rifleman looked in the jungle, but because of the gas mask. Facial hair breaks the seal, and in a war where riot control agents were used to clear tunnels and bunkers, a man who couldn't seal a mask was a liability. So there were units where a soldier who hadn't washed his body in 3 weeks was still expected to scrape his face with a dry razor and a helmet full of dirty water. Squad-level reality varied enormously. Plenty of accounts describe field beards on long operations, especially in reconnaissance units. But the underlying logic is the same one running through this entire file. Every hygiene decision in Vietnam was made on tactical grounds, never on comfort. The men shaved when a mask might save them, and stopped washing when soap might kill them. Nothing about it was arbitrary. Rain was the real shower. When the monsoon opened up, men stripped down in the open and stood in it, and the accounts of those moments carry a kind of joy that surprises people. Some kept a fragment of soap in a pocket specifically for a hard rain in a relatively secure position. Nothing rinses like a tropical downpour. And then there was the water that was already there. Bomb craters filled with rainwater and became swimming holes. Rivers, canals, and paddies became bathtubs, with an obvious catch. That water was, biologically speaking, not clean. Men bathed in it anyway, and picked up what came with it. Leeches, various parasites, and infections in every open sore they'd been carrying. In the Delta, where the war was fought in and around water constantly, the men were wet almost by definition, and their skin paid for every hour of it. Here's the reality of it from the inside. It's your 22nd day out. You've stopped noticing your own smell. That goes first, in about a week. And you've stopped noticing everyone else's, which means the platoon has arrived at a shared baseline no civilian would believe. Your fatigues have gone stiff, the fabric sanded thin by the rucksack straps, salt rings drying white across the back, where sweat evaporates and leaves the mineral behind. There's a raw patch inside your belt line you've been ignoring for 6 days because there's nothing to be done about it. Your fingernails are black. Your hair, under the helmet, is a mat you can't get your fingers through. Tonight, on the perimeter, a new guy fresh from the replacement depot sits down next to you, smelling of soap and laundered cotton, and you catch it instantly. And the first thought that goes through your head isn't envy. It's that this kid can be smelled from 30 meters, and he is sitting inside your wire. Somebody will tell him tomorrow. He will not need to be told twice. Which brings us to the other half of the war, because the same soldier who lived like that in the bush also got pulled back to the rear, and the contrast was violent. Stand down was the Great Reset, a company rotating off the line for a few days at a base camp, and the first stop, universally, was the shower point. In the rear, showers existed in the crudest possible form, and the men remember them like cathedrals, plywood or corrugated stalls, a canvas or steel drum overhead filled by hand or pump, gravity doing the rest. The water was often stored in 55-gallon barrels. In the sun, it went from cold to genuinely hot on its own, which meant a man's shower temperature depended on the time of day he got there. Some larger bases had real plumbing and heated water. Most didn't, and what the accounts describe about that first shower is nearly identical from man to man. The water ran brown, then gray, then weeks of accumulated grime came off in a way that was, veterans say, one of the purely good physical sensations of the war. Top 3, alongside dry socks and cold beer. The uniform frequently didn't survive the reunion. Fatigues that had been on a body for a month, soaked in sweat salt and mud, and worn thin, were often simply thrown away, burned or dumped rather than laundered, because there wasn't much fabric left worth saving. And then the man drew clean ones and ate hot food and slept on a cot, and inside of 2 or 3 days he was back on a helicopter going out to start the whole cycle over again. That was the rhythm. A month of controlled filth, 48 hours of civilization, and back out. There's something in that rhythm that explains a piece of the Vietnam veteran experience people usually miss. The war didn't just ask men to face danger, it asked them to live for a year in a state that no civilian in a developed country ever experiences for more than a camping trip. Never dry, never clean, never comfortable, with the smallest bodily comforts converted into rare luxuries you'd remember for 50 years. The danger came in bursts. The discomfort was constant. And when you ask veterans what they actually remember day to day, an enormous number of them talk about the wet, the filth, and the smell before they talk about the shooting. So the next time you see the photographs, the ones of grunts in the field, filthy, unshaven, uniforms black with sweat, staring at a camera they didn't ask for, you'll know you're not looking at neglect or a lack of discipline. You're looking at a set of rational decisions. Water goes to drinking because a dehydrated man dies faster than a dirty one. Soap gets left behind because scent travels farther than sound in a wet jungle. The helmet becomes a sink, the rain becomes a shower, and the crater becomes a bath. And a 19-year-old learns to carry his own stench as a form of camouflage, and to think of a hot shower not as a daily routine, but as an event, something that happens once a month, if the war allows it, and that he will still be talking about in his 70s. If you served, this part of the record belongs to you. How long was your longest stretch in the field without a shower? And what was your unit's rule on soap, deodorant, and toothpaste in the bush? Did your outfit shower at the crater, in the rain, out of the helmet, or not at all? Put it in the comments. The best story in these comments becomes a future file. If this one was worth your time, leave a like. It pushes these stories in front of more people who lived them. Share it with somebody who never had to think about where the water goes first, because this history is too strange and too human to stay buried. And subscribe for more of what they didn't put in the textbooks. To the men who carried the dirt because the dirt kept them alive, and to the ones who still remember exactly how that first shower felt, this file was for you.